Liberal journalist mocks Mark Wahlberg in public. Mark's stunning response leaves everyone silent. The night sky over Los Angeles shimmered with the promise of glitz and glamour as luminaries from every corner of the entertainment industry descended upon the luxurious ballroom, each invited to partake in a high-profile philanthropic event that promised both convivial celebration and meaningful charity, although everyone sensed an undercurrent of tension that would soon explode into the spotlight. People in elegant gowns and tailored tuxedos formed small circles of conversation, each group enveloped in polite laughter and the gentle clinking of champagne flutes, all while a discreet live band filled the air with soothing instrumental melodies that masked any hint of impending drama. Mark Wahlberg, whose reputation as a versatile actor and producer had earned him immense acclaim, arrived with an understated confidence, flashing the occasional friendly smile at starstruck attendees who parted before him like the Red Sea. Standing near the exquisitely adorned stage, he greeted old friends and colleagues, including directors, fellow actors, and philanthropic organizers, expressing genuine enthusiasm for the charitable cause that sought to support youth mentorship programs across underserved communities. Across the bustling floor, a renowned liberal journalist, famous for their provocative takes and fiery commentary, surreptitiously observed Wahlberg, quietly tapping notes into a sleek tablet while formulating opinions that would soon crackle through the room like a bolt of lightning. For days leading up to the gala, rumors had swirled that this journalist held a pointed grudge against Wahlberg, though the origin of their rancor remained a subject of speculation among insiders who whispered hushed warnings about a forthcoming confrontation. The air inside the ballroom shimmered with subtle intrigue, each swirling strand of possibility culminating in a tension that seemed to electrify the atmosphere, as though every bright chandelier and illuminated centerpiece were charged with restless energy. Attendees of all stripes, movie stars, fashion icons, tech moguls, even a smattering of politicians, noticed subtle glances exchanged between Wahlberg's entourage and the journalist, prompting curious murmurs about whether the night might devolve into sensational theater. Despite the looming shadow of conflict, the gala carried on with orchestrated precision, replete with a silent auction featuring priceless artworks and a lavish buffet that boasted an array of delicacies. Cameras flashed incessantly, capturing the gleaming smiles of famous faces, each photograph a snapshot of prosperity and prestige, even if just beneath those polished exteriors lay simmering rivalries and unspoken vendettas. Waiters drifted gracefully across the ballroom, balancing trays of effervescent champagne and handcrafted hors d'oeuvres, ensuring that no guest was left wanting for either refreshment or spectacle, while an endless parade of small talk and forced pleasantries shielded the underlying friction from immediate discovery. Huddled in a corner, the journalist stared intently at Wahlberg, recollecting every interview and statement he had ever made, sifting through perceived hypocrisies, controversies, and the rumored skeletons in his closet. The journalist's lips twitched into a slight smirk upon recalling Wahlberg's well-documented checkered past, a tough upbringing and a handful of incidents that threatened to derail his career before it ever truly began, and they felt a heated conviction rise in their chest. This evening, in a grand ballroom abuzz with well-heeled donors, the journalist intended to peel back the polished veneer of Hollywood stardom and expose a version of Wahlberg that they believed the public conveniently chose to ignore. Meanwhile, Wahlberg himself seemed blissfully unaware of the vendetta aimed in his direction, engrossed in heartfelt discussions with philanthropic leaders about the positive changes he hoped to make in the lives of disadvantaged youths. A hush fell over one segment of the crowd when the event's MC, a charismatic actor with philanthropic credentials of his own, approached the microphone to announce the beginning of the night's formal program, setting off a ripple of excitement that swept through the throngs of attendees. With the spotlight casting a warm glow on the stage, the MC welcomed everyone and praised their generosity, skillfully blending humor and earnest gratitude that elicited scattered applause from corners of the ballroom. Wahlberg, standing in a cluster near the front, applauded politely and momentarily locked eyes with the journalist lurking in the distance, though he quickly averted his gaze without fully registering the intensity contained within those watchful eyes. Slowly, the evening's itinerary unfolded. A short film about the youth programs benefiting from the gala, speeches from community leaders, and passionate testimonials from beneficiaries who had experienced profound life transformations as a result of the mentorship initiatives. Each tearful story underscored the event's noble objective, momentarily uniting every attendee under a shared sense of goodwill and philanthropic ambition. Yet, beneath the surface, the journalist's heartbeat quickened, the upcoming confrontation growing more certain with every passing moment, fueled by an urgent desire to test Wahlberg's authenticity in a public forum. Conversations ebbed and flowed during the dinner service, with clusters of guests discussing everything from the volatility of modern politics to the uncertain state of the entertainment industry, all while the journalists bided their time, honing the barbs they would eventually unleash. Wahlberg's own table buzzed with lively chatter, compliments flying about his recent film projects, queries regarding his physical training regimen, and inquisitive remarks about potential future collaborations. Through it all, Wahlberg maintained a poised demeanor, expressing gratitude for the recognition yet humbly shifting the spotlight to the charitable mission whenever he saw an opportunity. His calm, approachable nature momentarily dismantled the journalist's preconceived notions of a self-centered superstar, though these fleeting observations were not enough to quell the fervor that spurred the journalist forward. As the gala's formalities drew toward a climax, the journalist could feel adrenaline coursing through their veins, an electric anticipation that overshadowed the lofty philanthropic ideals filling the air. Guests started bidding on auction items, from custom-designed jewelry to exclusive set tours of upcoming blockbusters, the hum of excitement competing with the refined tempo of the live band. Photographers captured every winning bidder's triumphant grin, ensuring that social media would soon glow with images of generosity and star power, each photograph painting an appealing, if incomplete, picture of the night. Yet, not everyone was entirely enthralled by the glitz. Astute observers, including Wahlberg's close acquaintances, sensed that a storm was brewing, their concerned eyes flicking between the actor and the journalist who seemed increasingly restless. The room began to buzz with half-heard whispers of something's about to happen, though none could specify precisely how or when the tension would burst forth. The elaborate centerpieces on each table, tall vases of exotic flowers imported from continents away, trembled slightly in the shifting air, as though nature itself braced for the collision of personalities. Under the gilded arches of the ballroom's ceiling, reminiscent of old Hollywood grandeur, the scene had been perfectly set, a polished environment of charitable intention waiting to be shattered by clashing ideologies. Despite the cloak of sophistication draped over the event, Hollywood still thrived on drama, and this night would be no exception. The journalist, finishing off a final flute of champagne, felt emboldened to approach Wahlberg soon, spurred not only by personal convictions but by the knowledge that many eyes would be watching. In those intense moments, as the final speech concluded and applause rippled through the crowd, destiny seemed poised to orchestrate a fateful intersection between two people who represented starkly different facets of the public eye. Wahlberg noticed the journalists start to advance, weaving through the throng of attendees with a singular focus that made them appear both purposeful and potentially dangerous in their candor. A brief flicker of apprehension flashed across Wahlberg's face, a man accustomed to facing adversity but not immune to the anxiety of uncertain conflict. He understood, from the journalist's unyielding gaze alone, that their encounter was more than a casual greeting, and he mentally prepared to remain composed under whatever scrutiny was about to transpire. The chatter in the ballroom softened as if collectively holding its breath, and the once lively ambience took on an eerily charged edge that ignited everyone's curiosity. Cameramen from various entertainment networks sensed an opportune moment to capture a potential headline-making confrontation, subtly shifting their positions to film the two figures converging. The charitable nature of the evening, meant to unite hearts for a greater good, now transformed into a battleground for reputations and ideological stances. Wahlberg felt his pulse quicken, but he steadied himself, reminding his uneasy mind that he had navigated far stormier waters in life, and this was but another wave he needed to ride. In that suspended instant, the glitzy facade of a gala celebrating kindness threatened to fracture under the weight of personal vendettas and long-standing grudges, leaving everyone on edge. The journalist, steeled by conviction, prepared to unleash the thoughts they had harbored for so long, seemingly ready to expose what they considered an unpolished truth behind the actor's polished veneer. Wahlberg, however, chose to greet this approaching conflict not with fear or dread, but with a patient resolve tempered by experience and humility, setting in motion a chain of events that none present would soon forget. The journalist, whose name had become synonymous with incisive and often polarizing commentary, began their career as an ambitious intern at a major news network, where their fervent belief in progressive values sparked both admiration and criticism among colleagues who recognized a raw talent tempered by an unwillingness to compromise on deeply held principles. Their upbringing in a politically active household, led by a civil rights attorney father and a grassroots organizer mother, forged a fierce sense of responsibility toward exposing inequality, injustice, and what they considered the hollow pretenses of fame. From the start, they took special pride in investigating stories of celebrities who, in their view, used philanthropy as a means to mask or redeem personal failings, and each exposé brought them closer to a vision of journalism that strove to unveil the harsh truths hidden behind red carpet smiles. Despite earning a reputation for unflinching candor, the journalist endured setbacks early on, including multiple run-ins with editors who found their tone too combative. Yet every critique only cemented their resolve to dig deeper and push harder. Over time, they developed a distinctive style that melded pointed social commentary with meticulous research, crafting narratives designed to provoke mainstream audiences into reckoning with inconvenient realities. By the time they earned a prestigious column at a leading publication, they had already scrutinized numerous high-profile figures, from international political leaders to Hollywood icons, and cultivated a devoted following of readers who celebrated their sharp wit and uncompromising perspective. Nevertheless, the journalist's admirers were matched in number by critics who condemned what they saw as an incessant desire to drag personal matters into the public sphere, turning every misstep or personal shortcoming of a celebrity into a moral crusade. Mark Wahlberg, for his part, had not initially been a direct target of the journalist's pen, but as his star power soared, so did the rumors and recollections of his troubled youth that never fully disappeared from the public consciousness. The journalist came to view Wahlberg as emblematic of a Hollywood system that placed extraordinary emphasis on redemption stories, anointing once controversial figures as beacons of personal growth while neglecting to hold them fully accountable for the harm they caused in the past. Fueled by these convictions, the journalist pored over every available detail of Wahlberg's history, scrutinizing interviews, old court records, and charitable endeavors to craft a scathing narrative that would challenge his carefully curated public image. In hushed tones, they shared preliminary findings with fellow reporters, who were simultaneously intrigued and wary, sensing that a collision course was being set between the journalist's moral certitude and Wahlberg's popularity. An incident in which Wahlberg years ago had offered a vague apology for certain controversies without delving into meaningful details became the journalist's focal point for accusations of hypocrisy, and they latched onto it as proof that he simply sidestepped his past instead of confronting it. Their office space bristled with pinned-up photographs, highlighted quotes, and dog-eared magazine articles, all part of a meticulous tapestry meant to reveal, at least in the journalist's mind, a public persona polished for mass consumption. Political leanings played a part as well, for the journalist's staunch liberal stance clashed with rumors of Wahlberg's more conservative inclinations, though such talk often dipped into speculation more than fact. Still, every whisper about his attendance at certain private fundraisers or mention of him aligning with less progressive Hollywood circles only stoked the journalist's animosity. Late nights spent typing incendiary drafts and early mornings filled with phone calls to potential sources became the norm, and each minor detail gleaned from secondhand accounts or leaked documents felt like another building block in a case yet to be unleashed. Editors, aware of the journalist's single-minded dedication, tried to steer the story into more balanced territory, urging caution and nuance, but the journalist perceived these interventions as attempts to dilute the truth. To onlookers, it appeared that the journalist was less interested in objective reporting and more determined to make an example out of Wahlberg, using him as a symbol of Hollywood's knack for repackaging flawed individuals into beloved household names. Underneath this burning mission lay personal scars, some dating back to the journalist's childhood experiences with broken promises of reform within their own community, where a family member had been harmed by someone who later rebranded themselves as a changed individual without ever offering true amends. Every time the journalist thought of Wahlberg's philanthropic gestures, they bristled with the notion that such actions served as a shield, deflecting public scrutiny while never fully owning up to the deeper moral failings from years prior. fueled by a relentless belief that individuals with celebrity influence held an ethical obligation to confront their past in a manner far more transparent than standard PR strategies. The journalists saw it as a personal duty to hold Wahlberg accountable. Even so, they sometimes wrestled with moments of self-doubt, glancing in the mirror and questioning whether their relentless zeal to unmask hypocrisy had shifted into a more personal vendetta. Yet each glimmer of doubt was swiftly buried beneath renewed conviction whenever they encountered social media posts praising Wahlberg's transformation, or read articles lauding his charitable works without so much as a mention of his history. In private conversations with confidants, the journalist expressed a burning desire to see the actor forced into a situation where he could not simply dodge the hard questions, but would have to answer them in front of an audience unable to ignore the implications. Colleagues worried aloud about the ethical implications of pushing so hard against one individual, but the journalist countered that, as long as the public accepted partial truths, it was the press's duty to seek full disclosure. The politics of the day, with fervent debates on social responsibility and widespread calls for genuine accountability, only intensified the journalists' zeal, as they believed the current cultural moment demanded unwavering candor from powerful figures. Late into the nights, the journalist would revisit every instance in which Wahlberg sidestepped a question, every interview excerpt that seemed to dance around the sensitive parts of his past, storing each snippet like ammunition. A scrapbook of clipped headlines, worn from repeated perusal, contained each mention of Wahlberg's philanthropic milestones, annotated with the journalist's notes questioning their authenticity or the sincerity behind them. Sometimes, in an unguarded moment, the journalist contemplated whether their pursuit of truth had bled into an obsession, yet the swirl of unresolved frustrations over injustice, both personal and societal, always cemented their resolve. When news of the upcoming gala surfaced, with Wahlberg billed as a high-profile supporter, the journalists saw an unmissable chance to confront the actor in a venue too public and esteemed for him to casually deflect or walk away. The days leading to the event were consumed with internal monologues rehearsing potential jabs and pointed questions, ensuring no angle was left unexplored. If the journalist felt any guilt about using a charitable function as a battleground, they rationalized it by citing the very hypocrisy they aimed to expose. A star championing philanthropic causes without fully addressing his own moral debts. Instead of looking forward to the gala as a communal celebration of giving, they approached it like a crusade, every step weighed with the gravity of unveiling what they perceived as a grand facade. Private messages from peers warning them of possible fallout only inflamed their determination, as did the fleeting adrenaline rush from imagining the headlines that would follow if the confrontation yielded the scorching material they believed lurked beneath Wahlberg's polished demeanor. Between restless bouts of sleep, the journalists refined their approach, deciding that an outright attack might alienate potential allies, so they prepared a subtle line of questioning that would slowly tighten around Wahlberg's statements until he could no longer sidestep the crux of the matter. By the time the gala night arrived, the journalist was a coiled spring of pent-up frustration, personal convictions, and carefully curated evidence, every fiber of their being intent on a public showdown that would force a reckoning. Though the evening glittered with celebrities, exquisite decor, and a pleasant atmosphere of charity, the journalist's eyes rarely left Wahlberg, meticulously cataloging his interactions and searching for any sign of weakness. The fervor simmering inside them was driven not solely by professional ambition but also by a deep-seated belief in their cause, that illusions must be shattered for real progress to occur. Each second seemed to stretch as the night progressed, every wave of applause or laugh from the crowd triggering a pulse in the journalist's mind, urging them to act before the moment slipped away. Whispers about the journalist's intent to confront Wahlberg circulated among the well-dressed throng, with some guests nervously anticipating the clash and others dismissing it as routine scandal-mongering. Unmoved by either rumor or skepticism, the journalist clutched their tablet, brimming with facts and pointed remarks, savoring an almost grim satisfaction at the prospect of publicly challenging a figure whose redemption story they considered incomplete. Tension wrapped around the room like a tightening band, fueling the journalist's every breath, until even the soft glow of the chandeliers and the lilting music felt like mocking preludes to a battle no one else had quite prepared for. Heart pounding, the journalist counted off the minutes until the right opening presented itself, waiting for Wahlberg to linger in conversation just long enough to approach without being easily ignored. Upon seeing him preoccupied with fans and small talk, the journalist began to edge closer, feeling the uncertain hush that often precedes historic showdowns. Doubts threatened to unravel their nerve, but the memory of so many unasked questions and unspoken truths rallied their determination, casting aside any hesitation. In that final moment before they made their move, they inhaled the gala's perfumed air, steeling themselves for a confrontation that was, for them, not just another story, but the embodiment of everything they believed the press should be: unyielding, relentless, and fearless in pursuit of the real story beneath the glamour. Determined that this public sphere would serve as the perfect forum to demand accountability, they stepped forward, and though the chatter of the crowd continued, their own world narrowed to the intense focus of a single mission. The commotion and color of the gala seemed to fade away, replaced by an almost cinematic clarity in which every flicker of Wahlberg's expression would be scrutinized for honesty or evasion. Conflicting emotions of excitement, indignation, and perhaps a touch of moral righteousness propelled the journalist into this encounter, and with a measured exhale, they prepared to issue a challenge they believed was long overdue. As the MC stepped away from the microphone and the final applause for a heartwarming testimonial about the gala's beneficiaries faded, the journalists seized the moment to close the distance between them and Mark Wahlberg, their heart pounding with anticipation as onlookers turned curious eyes in their direction. Pausing only briefly to gather composure, the journalist called out a greeting that rang with icy politeness, prompting Wahlberg to pivot around and offer a tight-lipped smile that betrayed neither surprise nor hostility. Without warning, the journalist's tone shifted from formal civility to pointed critique, weaving condescending remarks about Wahlberg's earlier life choices into an impressive but unsettling display of factual precision that left the nearby crowd bristling in discomfort. They cited half-forgotten run-ins with the law, unflattering anecdotes from Wahlberg's youth, and allegations that he had sidestepped true accountability by framing his personal growth as a Cinderella story for the masses. Riveted and uneasy, the spectators, many of whom had come solely to support the event's philanthropic cause, found themselves trapped in a mounting spectacle that threatened to overshadow the evening's charitable purpose. A crisp tension filled the air, underscoring every syllable the journalist uttered, each one laced with layers of insinuation that cast Wahlberg's attempts at redemption as mere PR theatrics designed to safeguard his Hollywood standing. Unwilling to be dismissed, the journalist pressed on, delving into details of specific controversies that most attendees had relegated to the past, leaving Wahlberg's once latent transgressions shockingly vivid under the bright chandelier lights. Gasps rippled through the crowd when the journalist questioned whether the star's numerous charitable donations were genuine expressions of remorse or simply investments in a polished image that the public found easier to forgive. In that moment, the luxurious grandeur of the ballroom, the glittering centerpieces, immaculate drapery, and refined decor, melted away, replaced by a stark confrontation that juxtaposed the glamorous illusions of celebrity with the messy complexities of real human failings. Wahlberg, though clearly taken aback, initially offered only measured responses, attempting to deflect the accusations with talk of personal evolution and the value of looking forward instead of forever dwelling on mistakes. Yet the journalist skillfully intercepted these generalities, delivering a relentless barrage of questions demanding specifics: dates, apologies, reparation efforts, and the precise timeline of how his reformation came to be embraced by the media and fans alike. Concern creased Wahlberg's brow as he found himself pinned down by exacting demands for clarity, with no easy exit or calculated quip sufficient to quell the journalist's unyielding scrutiny. The tension became palpable enough that bystanders, once content to watch the drama unfold at a comfortable distance, slowly edged closer, their collective breath seemingly caught in their throats, uncertain whether to intervene or observe. Even the event organizers, who had planned for a seamless series of presentations and celebratory toasts, were paralyzed by uncertainty, torn between preserving the gala's convivial atmosphere and defending one of its star attractions from a ruthless public exposé. The clink of utensils and champagne flutes grew sporadic, drowned out by the hushed murmurs and stares directed at the clash unfolding near the stage, where a small throng had gathered in a loose semicircle around Wahlberg and the journalist. Some attendees wearing carefully curated smiles attempted to maintain the veneer of a typical gala evening, yet found their expressions faltering each time the journalist's voice rose with fresh conviction. Paparazzi stationed at the event, previously content to capture flattering shots of designer outfits and beaming celebrities, scrambled to reposition their cameras, scenting the potential for dramatic headlines that transcended the usual red carpet formula. Sparks of sympathy flickered in the eyes of those who respected Wahlberg's philanthropic efforts, though even his supporters were left uneasy by the force of the journalist's accusations, unable to ignore the unsettling accounts of an unacknowledged past. Others, more aligned with the journalist's fervent drive for transparency, nodded in grim approval, viewing this confrontation as long overdue reckoning for an industry that all too often bathes in the glow of redemption arcs without providing genuine contrition. Sensing that they had the full attention of every onlooker, the journalist's voice rose another octave, shattering whatever remnants of polite silence remained, as they mocked the very notion that a few charitable donations and public outreach campaigns could erase years of problematic behavior. The argument escalated when the journalist abruptly referenced a lesser-known altercation from Wahlberg's youth, concluding with a sneering remark about the superficial nature of forgiveness in Hollywood, which drew an audible collective gasp from the surrounding crowd. Wahlberg's jaw tightened, and though he remained outwardly calm, subtle signs of agitation surfaced in the narrowing of his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands, revealing that the ordeal was testing the boundaries of his composure. Small pockets of onlookers exchanged glances of shock or unease, some whispering that perhaps the journalist had taken the confrontation too far, while others muttered that truth required a certain measure of brutal honesty. The journalist, fueled by the palpable energy in the room, doubled down on their critique, dismissing Wahlberg's charitable endeavors as performative gestures aimed at overshadowing the gravity of offenses never fully addressed in the public sphere. A twitch in Wahlberg's demeanor indicated his frustration, and for a heartbeat, it appeared he might lash out, but he steadied himself, allowing a distinct current of tension to ripple through the air. Security personnel and event organizers hovered at the periphery, uncertain if stepping in might exacerbate the situation further or be perceived as shielding Wahlberg from accountability. Flashes from cameras popped in rapid succession, capturing the confrontation in still frames that would soon flood social media, immortalizing the exact moment the journalist crossed from polite inquiry into open ridicule. The hush that had fallen over the gala magnified every pointed jab, and it felt as though the ornate ballroom had transformed into an improvised courtroom, with the journalist as prosecutor and Wahlberg caught in the harsh glare of scrutiny. Frustration danced in Wahlberg's expression, tempered by a self-discipline he had likely honed after years in the spotlight, pushing him to remain civil when everything in him might have preferred a more direct rebuttal. A few bold attendees tried to interject, suggesting that the gala wasn't the time or place for such a contentious debate, but their voices were quickly lost in the swirling eddies of tension. The journalist flicked a dismissive glance toward these would-be peacemakers, clearly unwilling to relinquish the platform until all the questions had been thrust upon Wahlberg without reprieve. Observers ranged from enthralled to appalled, captivated by the raw spectacle that tore through the practiced artifice of celebrity gatherings and demanded audiences confront the gap between the image of the star and the sins of the past. For a few agonizing seconds, silence reigned as Wahlberg struggled to articulate a response that could address the deluge of criticism in a way that neither invalidated his journey of self-improvement nor trivialized the reporter's concerns. The tension was almost claustrophobic, locking the entire ballroom in an eerie stillness that underscored the high stakes. The very narrative of Wahlberg's redemption stood on trial. A wave of empathy washed through some in the crowd, as though they recognized the journalist's underlying message about accountability, but questioned the merciless nature of this public ambush. Others felt a sense of grim satisfaction, convinced that too many celebrities skate by on superficial solutions, and that Wahlberg, by virtue of his fame, deserved this public interrogation for the privilege he enjoyed. The journalist began to speak again, piling fresh indignations onto the previous claims, before culminating with an acerbic remark about Wahlberg's philanthropic contributions being nothing more than temporary fixes for a tarnished brand. Wahlberg's shoulders tensed, his gaze drifting from the journalist's searing stare to the anxious faces of fellow celebrities who hovered uncertainly, torn between loyalty to him and sympathy for the ideals the journalist championed. The entire room felt on the brink of an eruption, with each passing second a precarious step along a fault line between reasoned discourse and personal attack. When Wahlberg finally lifted a hand to quell the journalist's tirade, The moment seemed to stretch, as though an invisible pendulum swung precariously between absolute chaos and a chance at controlled dialogue. Yet the journalist ignored his silent plea for space, forging ahead with biting commentary about how the Hollywood machine profiteered on redemption arcs, exploiting them for public adoration while ignoring the deeper moral reckoning required. An almost audible snap of tension reverberated across the gathering when Wahlberg's expression shifted, sorrow flickering beneath his frustration, as though he recognized that the glib responses he had given in interviews could no longer suffice. Gasps broke through the hush, for in that instant, it became clear to everyone present that the conversation had escalated beyond typical paparazzi drama into a full-blown challenge to the very foundations of celebrity rehabilitation. The journalist, seemingly emboldened by the captive crowd's wide-eyed attention, delivered a final salvo, mocking the notion that Wahlberg's brand of contrition could be considered sincere, and ending their statement with an unambiguous barb about how some actors might be better suited to the role of a villain in real life than on the silver screen. The murmuring that swept through the onlookers was akin to an emotional current, an unsteady undertow that bore witness to a spectacle rarely seen in Hollywood circles. A star cornered, forced to face intimate accusations not in a carefully curated interview but a high-stakes public arena. Wahlberg's outward composure wavered, and the once booming gala felt suddenly claustrophobic, as if every table draped in fine linen and every elegant chandelier conspired to trap them all in an irreversible moment. In what might have been mere seconds but felt like a tense eternity, the actor composed himself enough to set aside the immediate temptation to retaliate in anger, his breathing measured as he prepared to speak at last. Even the MC, standing nearby, appeared pale and uncertain, fists clenched around a stack of note cards that had become utterly irrelevant in the unfolding drama. With the final echoes of the journalist's scathing remarks lingering in the rafters, an uneasy hush descended upon the gala, a moment of suspended realization that the evening had irrevocably changed. And there, in the silent chasm between accusation and response, stood Mark Wahlberg, confronted by an audience awaiting either a furious backlash or an admission of guilt, all while the journalist's fiery glare promised no clemency. A ripple of uneasy energy coursed through the lavish ballroom the moment it became apparent that Mark Wahlberg stood on the edge of a high-stakes confrontation, prompting clusters of attendees to exchange apprehensive glances as they weighed how, or even whether, to respond. Some guests, having observed the journalist's pointed remarks, immediately aligned themselves with Wahlberg out of loyalty or admiration for the philanthropic work he had championed throughout the evening, whereas others felt a surge of vindication that someone had finally cornered a celebrity into acknowledging the chasm between personal mistakes and public redemption. Conversations that had once been lighthearted and decorous turned tense and speculative, with an undercurrent of half-whispered theories about the motivations behind the journalist's ambush, as well as hushed worries that the gala's charitable mission was being overshadowed by scandalous drama. Even the meticulously arranged flower arrangements and glittering crystal centerpieces seemed to have lost their earlier glow, replaced by a solemn hush that spread outward in concentric circles from the epicenter of the confrontation, dampening the buoyant atmosphere that had characterized the night. Camera flashes, which moments before had signified excitement and celebrity glamour, now struck an almost invasive note, highlighting the wide eyes and hushed conversations of onlookers who struggled to decide whether to remain neutral or choose sides. A well-known director, famous for bridging controversial topics in his films, edged nearer to Wahlberg in a show of silent support, while a beloved actress, known for her activist pursuits, quietly gravitated toward the journalist, her arms folded as she intently listened for any genuine admission of wrongdoing that might justify redemption. Neither camp was devoid of doubt, for every sympathetic expression that Wahlberg received was countered by an uneasy recognition that the journalist's accusations, however blunt, tapped into a broader conversation about accountability in Hollywood. The tension manifested physically. Waiters carrying trays of champagne found themselves blocked by knots of transfixed guests who refused to budge, unwilling to look away lest they miss a single moment of the unfolding exchange. A once jovial producer tried to joke about the confrontation, but his voice carried awkwardly through the hush, drawing uncertain stares that quickly silenced any attempt at levity. The gravity of the moment had effectively banished the possibility of casual humor. Even the band, sensing the shift, allowed its music to trail off into muted chords, leaving only a faint echo that hovered like a fragile bubble amidst the thickening atmosphere of expectation. The few members of the press who had been invited to document the gala's charitable efforts found themselves with prime vantage points for the sudden drama, greedily snapping photos and filming video clips in hopes of capturing a defining quote or facial expression that might catapult the evening's events into viral territory. Meanwhile, the MC, normally so adept at guiding a crowd, stood off to the side with a stricken expression, flipping his note cards in a futile attempt to find some prepared line that could mitigate the escalating awkwardness. Conversations broke down into speculative gossip. A knot of socialites debated the merits of second chances. A pair of younger activists questioned the role of the press in holding celebrities to account, and an elderly philanthropist, known for stern moral pronouncements, nodded gravely at every pointed question the journalist posed. Each new wave of tension reverberated outward, transforming the event into a living tableau of human reactions. Compassion, cynicism, fear, indignation, empathy, and, underneath it all, the stark realization that the carefully polished veneer of glamour could crack without warning. Inside halls and at the edges of the ballroom, security staff exchanged anxious looks, uncertain whether to intervene, as physically the confrontation posed no immediate danger, yet it threatened to undermine the entire reason for the gala's existence. Some high-profile guests who prided themselves on neutral diplomacy attempted to diffuse the strain by drawing attention back to the evening's charitable cause, but their voices were soon lost in the mounting fervor of a crowd that wanted to witness resolution. Those who championed the idea that individuals can grow and change insisted in hushed tones that Wahlberg deserved a fair chance to explain, while others countered that any redemption arc must include full disclosure and contrition, which they felt he had yet to deliver. The tension created an unusual camaraderie among the curious, who banded together in quiet clusters, each group dissecting every snippet of the confrontation as though deciphering a live debate about moral authenticity. Even the opulent decorations, from the gold filigree adorning the walls to the plush carpets underfoot, seemed to take on a more subdued quality, as if the very spirit of the place had recognized the gravity of the moral reckoning taking shape. Beneath the surface, swirling currents of fear moved among event coordinators, who worried that donors might be put off by the controversy, thus endangering future contributions and overshadowing months of planning. Some well-intentioned guests, newly arrived and unaware of the unfolding drama, walked in with cheerful expressions, only to freeze in bewilderment as the heavy atmosphere enveloped them and forced them to piece together the cause of the gathering tension. An hour earlier, the air had been alive with easy laughter and philanthropic zeal, but now, every conversation seemed to echo the same question. Would Wahlberg deliver a meaningful reply or crumble beneath the relentless scrutiny the journalist was applying? In a corner, an esteemed critic for a major publication quietly surmised that the confrontation hinted at deeper societal shifts, reflecting a growing demand for genuine accountability in celebrity culture that no amount of public relations spin could fully placate. Others, less philosophical, merely gaped at the confrontation as if it were the live unveiling of a scandalous new exposé, replete with dramatic twists and emotional revelations. Tension spiked again when Wahlberg inhaled to speak, only for the journalist to launch another volley of accusations, prompting a smattering of groans from those hoping for a balanced exchange rather than a one-sided interrogation. The temperature of the room felt as though it had risen several degrees, with anxious sweat beading on foreheads and the quick, shallow breathing of those caught up in the spectacle replacing the idle chatter that had once flowed so easily among acquaintances. Photographers, sensing the potential for iconic images, repositioned themselves with silent efficiency, capturing the widening gap between Wahlberg's supporters, who wore expressions of hope and concern, and the journalist's sympathizers, who looked on with grim satisfaction. A faint rattle echoed from a tray of champagne glasses held by a visibly nervous waiter, underscoring the palpable shift from celebratory indulgence to a tension akin to that of a courtroom awaiting a critical verdict. Even the star-studded nature of the audience began to fade, replaced by an eerily democratic sense that all were equal participants in a public reckoning, forced to witness or perhaps even judge a moral standoff with unforeseen consequences. The evening schedule was in shambles, with planned performances and speeches relegated to an afterthought, overshadowed by the immediate sense that a threshold of truth was being tested in a most unexpected forum. A smattering of guests considered slipping away early to avoid the negativity, yet found themselves rooted in place, almost spellbound by the intensity of the unfolding scenario, as if leaving would render them complicit in ignoring matters of significant import. Anxiety curled around every glittering chandelier, whispered through every lace hemline, and coiled itself into every hesitant breath, until it felt like the entire gathering was collectively bracing for an eruption of raw emotion. Out of earshot of the main confrontation, a few older Hollywood veterans exchanged knowing glances, recalling times when their own controversies had nearly ruined them, and wondering if the grace they had received then was truly earned or simply purchased by their fame and power. The notion of accountability hung in the air like an unanswered question, dancing on the edges of every conversation, as though the entire industry was being asked to reconcile its passion for forgiveness with the demands for a more rigorous, transparent atonement. Meanwhile, Wahlberg's tension radiated out like a halo, evident in his rigid posture and tightened jaw, transforming him from the affable star that most people recognized into a man who was suddenly stripped of protective illusions and confronted with the harsh glare of unresolved controversies. The journalist, despite being the catalyst of this turmoil, drew only partial satisfaction from the frenzied energy surrounding them, for it was clear that public support could swiftly turn against them if the crowd perceived an overstep into needless cruelty. Indeed, a few guests began murmuring about the journalist's tone, suggesting that while accountability is crucial, the public berating of someone at a charity gala might compromise the evening's philanthropic intentions. Yet this did little to stem the roiling chatter, which continued to swirl like a tempest circling around the two central figures, as if the entire event had become a stage for a modern morality play in which no outcome could satisfy everyone. In the far corners of the ballroom, large displays showcasing the achievements of the youth mentorship programs flickered amid the crowd, underlining the irony that the very cause meant to unite hearts now served as the backdrop for an intense personal conflict. A hush fell again whenever Wahlberg moved or attempted to speak, revealing the crowd's ravenous need to see whether he would lash out in self-defense or offer a deeply reflective answer that might redeem not just him, but the entire evening. The tension was enough to make people visibly jump whenever cutlery clattered or a glass was set down too firmly, as if even minor sounds threatened to upset the fragile equilibrium between confrontation and civility. In that moment, the gala became an impromptu forum for broader cultural schisms: celebrity worship versus authentic accountability, the desire for redemption versus the necessity of full disclosure, and the friction between polite society and the raw confrontation of uncomfortable truths. All the while, the journalist stood unwavering, shoulders squared, eyes shining with a complicated mix of righteous anger, professional triumph, and perhaps the slightest hint of anxiety about where this public scolding would ultimately lead. At the same time, Wahlberg remained at the center of the maelstrom, well aware that every passing second without a decisive response threatened to expose the cracks in his meticulously cultivated persona, pushing him to either confess deeper truths or risk losing the audience's faith forever. If there were any illusions left that this confrontation might swiftly dissipate, they were dashed by the unwavering interest of the onlookers, who found themselves involuntarily participating in an unexpected referendum on celebrity accountability and personal responsibility. Thus, the gala that had begun with so much promise, a testament to the collective generosity of a community, had taken a turn toward introspection and discord, leaving its attendants to wonder if meaningful resolution could be found in the rapidly closing hours of a night that had become a crucible for moral scrutiny. And as the journalist's final words of the moment hung in the tense air, the crowd collectively inhaled, preparing itself for whatever response Wahlberg would offer in the face of such withering condemnation, a response that could irrevocably shift the room's collective sentiment and perhaps even redefine his entire public narrative. A hush enveloped the ballroom as Mark Wahlberg, his gaze steady despite the turbulence in his chest, slowly inhaled and prepared to address the incendiary accusations leveled against him, determined that his response would neither devolve into anger nor dodge the gravity of the journalist's claims. He stood straighter, making deliberate eye contact with onlookers who had once flocked to him for casual conversation but now regarded him with a potent blend of curiosity, empathy, and skepticism, each face an unspoken challenge that dared him to either confirm or disprove every unflattering insinuation. Where others might have resorted to glib deflections or platitudes, Wahlberg began by admitting that he had made mistakes in his youth, mistakes he conceded were far worse than mere lapses in judgment, especially given the harm they had caused people whose names he still remembered to this day. He spoke in a measured tone, his words taught with sincerity rather than defensiveness, describing the tumult of his early life, the rage that once drove him to lash out, and the shame he felt whenever he revisited memories he could never fully rewrite. Recognizing that apologies alone could only reach so far, he admitted that for a long time he tried to outrun his past, seeking distance from the haunting recollections of his misguided choices, rather than confronting the pain inflicted on others. Yet he insisted he had gradually come to understand that transformation meant more than burying regrets beneath a flood of charitable acts, and that true accountability required him to accept he would always bear responsibility for what he had done. By recounting nights spent wrestling with remorse, he laid bare the vulnerability behind his public persona, confessing that every accolade and every red carpet moment felt tainted if he hadn't done enough to mend the repercussions of those old wounds. He confessed that he once believed philanthropic gestures might cleanse the tarnish of earlier transgressions, but each act of giving soon revealed another layer of self-deception, urging him to realize that genuine reparation demanded confronting the specifics of what he had done. A hush settled over the crowd as he revealed that he had directly reached out to certain individuals from his past to offer more personal atonement, though he admitted these overtures could never fully undo the hurt he had caused. He glanced momentarily at the journalist, acknowledging that, in some ways, their pointed interrogation was a reminder that fame should not shield someone from the obligation to answer hard questions, particularly when their record was far from clean. Explaining that a desire to help disadvantaged youth stemmed from his own tumultuous upbringing, he described how programs much like the ones benefiting from the gala had saved him from spiraling deeper into a life defined by violence and desperation. Yet he refused to wield that background as an excuse, recognizing that his actions at the time were still a choice, choices that had hurt people, especially those unable to speak out or defend themselves. The room seemed to constrict around him as he paused, collecting his thoughts, aware that merely offering a repentant speech without acknowledging the immediacy of the accusations might appear insincere, so he spoke to the specific incidents the journalist had raised. He detailed the remorse he felt when reading over the old headlines, not as a casual recollection but as a visceral reckoning that marked each unwise step he had taken, no matter how successful he eventually became in Hollywood. He admitted that in certain interviews, he kept the conversation broad and impersonal because he feared the media would exploit raw confessions, twisting them into provocative headlines and overshadowing the progress he had fought so hard to achieve. The lights seemed brighter, each chandelier refracting the tension in prismatic shards as he declared, with a voice that trembled yet refused to break, that no one should Leonize him as an exemplar of perfect transformation until he had consistently lived up to the moral standards he espoused. He pressed his palms together as if in prayer, scanning the crowd with a contrite gaze, conveying that while he could never fully erase the hurt he once caused, he believed it essential to remain transparent about the ongoing effort to be a better man. His words took on a tone of imploring humility when he spoke of how easy it was for Hollywood to cloak personal failings in glamour, generating myths of redemption that fail to adequately honor the painful realities behind such narratives. He described how each philanthropic event he attended was part of a genuine desire to give back, but also an opportunity to internalize that his success was built on a second chance not everyone is fortunate enough to receive. He turned toward the journalists directly, acknowledging their concerns about shallow image rehabilitation, conceding that cynicism was understandable in an industry where truth can be packaged for spectacle, and redemption can be hijacked as a marketing ploy. He refrained from hurling accusations back at his critic, instead conceding that legitimate skepticism could spur important conversations about who benefits from redemptive storylines and who remains marginalized or unheard. His voice softened as he recalled an exchange with a mentor from his younger years, someone who had insisted that meaningful transformation is less about eradicating old errors and more about facing them honestly, so one can move forward with genuine integrity. He recounted an instance where he revisited the neighborhood where the darkest chapters of his life played out, explaining how confronting that physical space underscored how permanent certain scars can be, both for oneself and for those one has harmed. The crowd was so silent that every small rustle of fabric and every muted click of a camera echoed like a drumbeat, emphasizing the gravity of a celebrity casting aside curated sound bites in favor of earnest introspection. It was then he emphasized that philanthropic involvement wasn't a shield but a responsibility, that if he claimed to care about lifting at-risk youth, he had to remain open about how he once contributed to a culture of violence. He refused to posture as a martyr, acknowledging that if the public saw fit to hold him accountable, he had an obligation to listen without bristling at inconvenient truths. Admitting he had not always lived up to these standards, he pinned part of the blame on the addictive comfort of celebrity status, which can lull individuals into believing they are beyond reproach, even as they profess humility. Voices murmured in the crowd, but no one dared speak loudly. Each moment of vulnerability he offered seemed to draw people further into the tension, wrapped by this raw display of contrition that challenged the standard PR script. The journalist, though not entirely satisfied, wore a begrudgingly thoughtful expression, perhaps taken aback by the candor in Wahlberg's words, which lacked the usual glibness that attends high-profile star statements. Wahlberg interjected that while he couldn't pretend to be proud of his past, he viewed it as crucial to show others, especially young people who feel trapped by their circumstances, that paths to redemption exist, as messy and incomplete as they may be. He distanced himself from the notion that a few philanthropic contributions could effectively buy forgiveness, pointing out that no amount of money or volunteering could truly compensate those he wronged, and that the best he could do now was strive for authenticity in how he used his platform. He asked the audience, particularly the journalist, to recognize that any personal transformation is riddled with complexities, and that truly righting old wrongs demands consistent effort, deep introspection, and a willingness to remain answerable to both critics and supporters. Where once the hush in the hall felt oppressive, it now vibrated with a slight shift in energy, the ambience less suffocating and more reflective, as though a communal introspection had begun to settle over the throng. Wahlberg went on to say that, as time had passed, he learned the difference between superficial remorse, which only springs up when one's reputation is in jeopardy, and the deeper sort, which persists even in private moments absent any audience to witness it. The empathy from some of the onlookers began to show in the subtle tilt of heads and relaxed postures, an unspoken acknowledgement that acknowledging wrongs is a fundamentally human act that resonates beyond the realm of tabloid drama. In a sober yet heartfelt tone, he thanked the youth programs that had given him structure and role models, pointing out that no matter how successful he became, he owed a debt to the organizations that essentially saved him from continuing down a destructive path. He also, much to the surprise of some spectators, thanked the journalist for demanding an explanation, admitting that his own fear of being misunderstood might have led him to dodge certain conversations, inadvertently muddying the sincerity of his philanthropic intentions. The hush in the audience deepened, an almost reverent quiet that spoke to the collective understanding that they were witnessing something more authentic than a carefully massaged PR statement, forcing them to reconcile the tabloid's portrayal of Wahlberg with the complexity of what stood before them. He explained that, in facing pointed questions, he found a new chance to highlight how no one's path from ignorance and wrongdoing to a more evolved stance is linear or unblemished, and that it is precisely the humility of acknowledging ongoing imperfection that grants a measure of moral legitimacy to claims of personal growth. The journalist, for all their skepticism, shifted stance ever so slightly, as if wrestling with the realization that rigid condemnation can sometimes overlook the potential for meaningful transformation, particularly when accompanied by an honest accounting of the harm done. Wahlberg concluded with a stark admission that while the grace and forgiveness he has received might never be fully deserved, he could only keep striving to merit them by continually reevaluating how his choices aligned with the man he aspired to become. He met the journalist's gaze, asserting that if further dialogue was necessary, he was willing to engage openly and provide specifics, rather than sidestepping confrontation in the future or sugarcoating the realities of who he once was. Applause was hesitant at first, like the uncertain patter of raindrops before a downpour, but soon grew into a wave of measured, thoughtful clapping that signaled the crowd's tentative acceptance of his willingness to assume responsibility. Guests glanced at each other with nuanced expressions, some visibly moved, others still processing their reservations. Yet none could deny the gravity of the moment, a breach in the usual Hollywood veneer that allowed an unfiltered glimpse into the fraught and fragile process of redemption. Even the lights seemed to soften, as though the entire ballroom exhaled in unison, relieved that the tension had shifted from a combative standoff to an uneasy truce grounded in frank admissions and a genuine offer for continued scrutiny. The journalist, eyes glinting with a mixture of lingering doubt and a subtle hint of respect, did not immediately reply, sensing perhaps that the night's defining statement had been made and that whatever came next required careful reflection. A second wave of applause rose from diverse pockets of the audience, capturing the acceptance, sympathy, skepticism, and cautious optimism that swirled in intangible currents across the room. Wahlberg stood rooted in that emotional storm, chest heaving with the weight of his confession. The typically confident star now a portrait of uneasy relief tinged with humility, opening the door for a conversation far deeper than any standard image-managing approach. Stillness enveloped everyone as they waited for the journalist's reaction. The metamorphosis of the room's energy, a testament to the power of an authentic response to temporarily quell a raging confrontation, if not settle every doubt permanently. And for that singular moment, it seemed as if the gala had rediscovered a measure of its original spirit, the notion of coming together for a cause, shaped now by the sobering reminder that charity is not merely a cloak but a sacred duty, one that demands honesty from everyone involved, no matter how famous they are or how rugged their past may be. In the days and weeks that followed the gala's tumultuous conclusion, a tangible shift reverberated through Hollywood circles, as though everyone who had been present or heard rumors of that night now recognized that something profound had been laid bare. By morning, entertainment news outlets and opinion blogs alike buzzed with eyewitness accounts of the confrontation and Mark Wahlberg's earnest response, igniting a heated discussion about the credibility of redemption narratives in a celebrity-driven culture. The journalist, whose scathing interrogation of Wahlberg had prompted such intense scrutiny, found themselves at the center of a maelstrom of conflicting viewpoints, hailed as a hero by some for demanding accountability, yet chastised by others for disrupting a charity event. Social media brimmed with debate and hashtags referencing both the journalist's name and Wahlberg's sword, as countless users dissected footage captured by event-goers, each side arguing whether the star's remorse was genuine or simply another well-executed performance. Talk shows invited panelists to scrutinize the morals of a culture that alternately reveres and reviles public figures, spotlighting the nuance that many individuals can do real good for society, even when their personal histories cast long shadows. Various late-night hosts weighed in with comedic monologues, some poking fun at the high drama that had unraveled in a venue designed for charitable elegance, while others offered surprisingly poignant takes on the complexity of personal growth. Through it all, Wahlberg's name dominated headlines, not merely as a movie star promoting a film or an actor rumored to be eyeing an upcoming project, but as a case study in how a past marked by mistakes could be reframed or not, in the glare of public attention. For their part, event organizers were initially mortified that their painstakingly planned fundraiser had devolved into an ideological battleground. Worried donors might withdraw or question the integrity of future initiatives. Yet, as donations continued to roll in, perhaps bolstered by the heightened visibility and ongoing debate, organizers conceded that controversy had brought a certain urgency to the cause, casting new light on the importance of youth mentorship and the delicate line between redemption and responsibility. The journalist, meanwhile, balanced a flurry of interview requests and editorial offers from outlets eager to showcase the individual who had forced an A-list celebrity to confront his old transgressions head-on. Though not all requests were sympathetic, they penned a lengthy piece reflecting on their motivations at the gala, explaining how the moment had crystallized their belief that the press must never cower from pressing for answers, yet hinting at a dawning awareness that sometimes genuine remorse could be overshadowed by relentless interrogation. Critics pounced on the article, questioning whether the journalist had exploited the event for personal notoriety, while supporters insisted that only unyielding scrutiny could chip away at Hollywood's tendency to package redemption as a brand commodity. Wahlberg's camp, in contrast, remained strikingly calm, issuing a measured statement repeating key points of his confession from the gala, promising to continue open communication regarding his philanthropic initiatives and personal efforts toward restitution. Some fans lauded him for what they perceived as admirable candor in the face of vicious probing, whereas others insisted that any contrition offered under public pressure should be measured with caution before being wholeheartedly embraced. The philanthropic community at large seized the spotlight to highlight the plight of at-risk youths, leveraging the incident's publicity to call for more robust support of mentorship programs that could break cycles of violence and recidivism in marginalized neighborhoods. Through this lens, Wahlberg's tumultuous past and subsequent advocacy were recast as an opportunity to teach lessons about perseverance and moral evolution, though skeptics were never far behind, questioning whether feel-good stories masked the deeper structural changes that were needed. In the swirl of public discourse, the youth who had attended the gala, some as speakers for the cause, others as volunteers, became potent voices, sharing that seeing such honesty from a man with a troubled past gave them hope they might one day overcome their own challenges. For the journalist, the aftermath proved complicated, as they found themselves wrestling with an unspoken tug of conscience. They had accomplished their aim by exposing moral ambiguities, yet they were unsettled by how the firestorm overshadowed the night's broader mission. Invitations to appear on talk shows and news segments poured in, feeding the uneasy sense that the event had become more spectacle than substantive debate, all the while overshadowing the philanthropic spirit that started it all. The journalist's columns began reflecting a tempered tone, acknowledging that while personal accountability is crucial, a relentless quest to dismantle every so-called redemption story risked trivializing genuine efforts at transformation. Quietly, they attempted to reach out to individuals who had benefited from the same youth programs that shaped Wahlberg in his younger days, aiming to craft a comprehensive piece exploring whether celebrities truly owed more than public apologies, or if their philanthropic support could stand as its own kind of restitution. Wahlberg, on the other hand, faced personal reckonings after the public humiliation of having old wrongs laid bare before a star-studded crowd, and he set about reevaluating which charitable efforts he supported and how he communicated his intentions to both fans and the media. He surprised some by declining a series of high-profile interviews, choosing instead to participate in more low-key community events, where he interacted directly with young people who had faced hardships mirroring his own adolescent experience. At each engagement, he opted for candor, freely admitting that he continued to grapple with guilt and that every donation, volunteer hour, or public appearance was only part of an ongoing attempt to rectify damages beyond true repair. Observers noted that his approach shifted. He seemed more earnest, less prone to the polished, press-ready statements of the past, and more willing to acknowledge that he might never entirely escape the specter of his early misdeeds. Beyond Hollywood, the story seeped into broader cultural dialogues about the intersection of justice, punishment, forgiveness, and celebrity culture's penchant for prioritizing narratives of uplift over painful truths. Universities hosted panel discussions dissecting the incident, referencing social theories about moral authority and the mechanisms by which societies decide when a transgressor's atonement is sufficient for reintegration. Some mental health professionals publicly commented on the ramifications of holding individuals perpetually liable for past mistakes, explaining that while accountability matters, unending public condemnation can stall true rehabilitation. Conversations also arose around privilege, with critics pointing out that Wahlberg's path to redemption was undoubtedly eased by fame and resources that most people with similar records would never access. Ultimately, the gala itself became something of a legend, recounted in insider circles and used in media trainings as an example of how swiftly an event can pivot from celebration to confrontation, and how that moment of conflict can yield unexpected avenues for deeper reflection. Donors who had previously seen charitable events as photo opportunities found themselves reevaluating their own contributions, asking whether they, too, were guilty of seeking the applause of good deeds without fully grappling with systemic issues. The journalist received a handful of letters from individuals who claimed they had committed smaller-scale harms in their past and saw a piece of themselves in Wahlberg's predicament, grateful that the confrontation forced a more meaningful discussion about second chances. These testimonials gave the journalist pause, spurring them to re-examine the line between holding the powerful accountable and denying them the space to evolve beyond their darkest moments. In parallel, Wahlberg fielded letters from people who admitted they had never forgiven him for the harm he once caused, reminding him that no public statement could take the place of direct amends and genuine personal growth that might last a lifetime. The swirling emotions and outcomes coalesced into a complicated mosaic, neither wholly triumphant for the journalist nor wholly vindicating for Wahlberg, but a messy, intensely human series of developments that underscored how each step toward healing could unearth more questions than answers. As the hype gradually subsided, each party found themselves facing the quieter aftermath. For Wahlberg, it meant continuing his unglamorous journey of restitution, forever mindful of eyes waiting for him to slip back into complacency, and for the journalist, it meant grappling with the ethical dimensions of how far to push for public reckonings. Even outside observers, from fans to industry insiders, absorbed lessons about how easily a single night could expose the hidden tensions in star-studded circles, leaving them more conscious of the nuanced reality that redemption is rarely a neat, linear story. In an era defined by viral spectacle, the gala's memory persisted, not as a scandalous footnote but as a milestone that briefly broke the cinematic illusions of fame and forced participants to confront the raw, uncomfortable demands of real accountability. Mark Wahlberg, though still the target of cynics and tabloids, acquired a new layer of public identity, one in which the echoes of his past were neither fully condoned nor excused, but engaged with as part of an ongoing moral conversation. Similarly, the journalist's standing evolved beyond that of a fierce commentator. Those who loathed their tactics still admired the courage to question power, while those who initially cheered on the ambush began to see the personal toll that unwavering scrutiny can exact on everyone involved. And so, like the shimmering afterglow that settles once the last spotlight dims, the story lingered, teaching those who listened that sometimes the grandest illusions of celebrity and the purest intentions of charity collide, and from that collision might arise the kind of uncomfortable honesty that both divides and unites a fractured public. Over time, as new controversies inevitably captured the headlines, the intensity surrounding Wahlberg's debacle began to fade, but never entirely vanished, leaving behind a subtle but powerful reminder that in the space between condemnation and absolution, real growth requires a reckoning with both one's critics and one's conscience. From that evening forward, when asked about redemption, Wahlberg spoke with a tempered humility, aware that no matter how many successes lay ahead, the scars of his past would never vanish, only become a testament to the possibility that a flawed individual can choose a better path. And although cynics insisted that every charitable act remained mere pageantry, many fans and beneficiaries of his philanthropy, including some of those kids who had never seen a star's meltdown in real time, found reasons to believe that witnessing vulnerability could spark empathy even in those who profit most from public acclaim. For the journalist, the night's repercussions wound their way into subsequent articles, shaping a more nuanced worldview that acknowledged the need to balance relentless accountability with recognition of genuine remorse, underscoring that ethical journalism must strive for fairness, not just fireworks. Within the hush of that final reflection, the industry at large gained a renewed awareness that true accountability is neither glitzy nor conclusive, but a stirring process that demands time, transparency, and the painful realization that no amount of fame can outrun one's past misdeeds forever. A sense of wary respect stretched between Wahlberg and the journalist, who, despite lingering differences, maintained an unspoken agreement that their explosive encounter had unearthed far more about the complexities of redemption and the fragility of reputation than any headline ever could. And in this fragile truce of introspection, the star, the critic, and their captivated audience found themselves briefly united in the sober recognition that if redemption is to have any real meaning, it must be tested in the unyielding light of truth, no matter how publicly painful that may be.